Okay, testing. Are we good? All right. We have a lot to cover today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. As you were told in the previous room, we are volunteering to create this entire conference, and I'm the room host right now as well as the presenter. So I'm introducing ourselves. We're a tiny but mighty crew. So I hope you're ready to get started. If you're joining us online, please place your questions in the Q&A panel rather than the chat panel, as the chat will not be moderated. For attendees here in the room, please hold your questions until we say we have question breaks. We do have them throughout the session, throughout our presentation. In our presentation, Creating Accessible and Trauma-Friendly Post-Secondary Learning Experiences, London and I, Krista Puruhito, will explore the overlap between trauma and disability and how this impacts learning, how to foster authentic connection with students that supports their learning, how to communicate with students, and how to support executive functioning in order to create trauma-sensitive, accessible learning environments for post-secondary education. That was a long sentence. We will also get tips for how to set up courses in Canvas to be user-friendly. I introduced myself already. I'm an associate teaching professor in the School of Social and Family Dynamics, and London Skiles is an instructional designer with the School of Social Transformation. Welcome, everyone. So straight into some housekeeping. Please feel free to listen and not worry about taking a lot of notes. You can download the entire slide deck with our notes on it at the end. The session's also being recorded, so you can revisit it later with transcripts and closed captioning. Think about how you can apply what we are sharing as we go, and ask about barriers. I love it when people point out holes in my work because it makes me better. Also, do what you need to do to be able to engage. If you need to move around or jump, stand up, jumping jacks, I'm kind of frozen right now, so I totally get it. Will not bother us.
And I move all the time, if you know me at all. So do what you need to do to be comfortable and to stay engaged.
Yes. So quickly, I want to say thank you to my mentors. If anyone's been around at ASU for any amount of time, you probably know them. Jennifer Huseman, Jill Stam, and Kathy Nakagawa. Without their mentorship and instruction, I would not be the academic I am today, but they have also informed many other areas of my life. My children, 2 of my kids were born at 24 weeks gestation and have multiple disabilities, lots of medical stuff. There were points in my academic career where I was told I should just quit trying and go be a parent. I didn't quit. I'm here today. But I also have fostered kids with a lot of trauma. And so my children's experiences with disabilities, fighting in IEP meetings, and all of those things have informed my instruction and the way I teach. Have an IEP meeting today, so good times. But I'm really hoping to expand access and create more accessible learning environments for my kids when they get to college, but also my students that I already serve. So.
And I'm London Skiles. Oh, that's cables.
You want to switch me sides?
Yeah, that's going to be bad.
Okay.
My thank yous are, there's 3 names on the screen, Rita, Kate, and Suzanne, and each of those people provided for me a little bit of safety at very key points in my life. But my biggest thank you goes to the kid in that photo. That's me, if you haven't put it together yet. I'm about 5 in that photo. And by the time that kid posed for that photo, I had already experienced what is known as adverse child experiences, many of them, that shaped who I was very early on. And I don't want to say who I was, but how I experienced the world. So let me reframe that a little bit. And so when I think about that kid, a lot of what I do is informed by that kid, and the support that kid needed. I also want to share a little bit. So that's little me. Little me didn't have a lot of ability to articulate. If you were in the keynote, you heard Bello say, like, I didn't have the vernacular, right? Well, little me didn't have the language to talk about what was happening. So what I will also share with you is that I am autistic. That's why I move a whole lot. That's why you see my ducks and my hyperfixation. Get you friends that completely enable your hyperfixation, because these were given to me this morning. And I am also transgender, and that is going to be important, and we will understand why in a bit. My world growing up was influenced by the intersection of those things. And my PTSD is really linked to those things and how that kid experienced the world. And so when I talk to you about trauma-inclusive pedagogy, instruction, design, I think about that kid and all the kids like that kid who needed what I didn't get a lot of the times, because I'm 50, right? I was born in the 70s. You know, a lot of the supports weren't there. And even still, there are a lot of gaps in the supports that kids need. And so that's my thank yous.
So London just did a really amazing thing called Uncovering and shared with you all her personal experiences and intersectionalities. There, sorry, I apologize. Thank you for correcting me. They shared their personal experiences and their history, and I wanted to point that out because I feel like it's an important opportunity to connect with students. Being vulnerable is hard, and we try to balance professionalism with personal experiences, but in the spirit of sharing, as London just did, I also, as a result of my children's experiences and my childhood, have PTSD and anxiety, and it affects how I show up every day. And so, you know, on varying levels, I do share some of that with my students when I talk about my children. So today we will discuss why trauma-sensitive post-secondary learning environments are important, creating connections with students, communicating with students, executive functioning, and we're going to briefly touch on universal design for learning, but we're not going to go very in depth because there are several sessions in the conference today that will touch on those. And we do have pauses for questions after 2, 4, and 5. So first, what is trauma-informed instruction and why do we do it in the college learning environments? Let's see, what is this hour? Nope, okay.
All right, so you're going to hear me use some terms kind of interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. Okay. Trauma informed, trauma inclusive, trauma friendly. You're going to hear those throughout. The principles that are on the screen, and unfortunately our captions are covering some of them, so it'll be fine though. I'll let you know which ones those are.
Actually, London, may I pause? Is anyone using the closed captions in here today? They can see them twice on the Zoom. I can turn them off on this screen if no one's using them. Okay.
Where was I going? Oh, so the 6 principles here are pulled from a variety of fields, whether that is medical, whether that is in terms of psychology, whether it is in terms of education. So when you think about principles, if you Google it, you're going to get, what are the 5 principles? What are the 6 principles? What are the 7 principles? What are the 10 principles? And it just depends on the lens that you're using. When I think of trauma-inclusive pedagogy, I just pick and choose whichever ones work. Right? They all work in different settings, and so it's about being flexible. These 6 are the ones that I really wanted to focus on today. And they are, most importantly, you already heard me talk about my safe spaces, creating safety, physical and emotional safety, not just for yourself, but for others. Okay? Trust and transparency, maintaining confidentiality. You'll hear me say, if I'm talking, like I'll go to say something and I'll be like, that is not my story to share. Right? That's a confidentiality component. And providing clear and consistent expectations. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I'm going to use myself as an example because that's what I know. I shared just now that are you guarding the cables? Thank you. I've got my emotional support presenter here who's helping me not fall. I shared that I'm transgender. It's all over the internet now. So, hey, internet. But here's where it gets tricky when we're thinking about trauma inclusive, right? That's my story to share, right? So even if your student comes to you and shares parts of their identity, that's their story to share. And so maintaining confidentiality is recognizing that it's not your story to share and being mindful of that, okay? It's also being clear and consistent with your expectations, so that people know we know what is expected of us, right? Choice, prioritizing individual choice, prioritizing control, and prioritizing autonomy. I'm going to go through the last three a little bit quicker because I spent a little bit too much time on the first two. Collaboration, minimizing power dynamics, right? I see a lot of instructors do this where they're like, this is what you can call me, and we are going to. There's a lot of there's a lot of collaboration in the classroom, and that is so important in breaking down those power dynamics that can often affect individuals. Empowerment, recognizing strengths, preferences, and unique experiences of individuals. And then the last one, responsiveness. And now it will become clear why I shared some of what I shared, because to be trauma inclusive, we have to recognize the historical trauma that has occurred for many communities, racial communities, disability communities, religious communities, whatever that community, we have to recognize that historical trauma, and we have to embrace the healing value of culture and community.
Okay, so that's a lot to process all at once, right? You're like, oh, I have this class and now I have 6 new things I need to pay attention to. And it may seem like, okay, maybe I can just glaze over a little bit, but why is this important? Trauma doesn't magically disappear when we graduate high school or turn 18. The trauma also happens across the lifespan. Like I shared, my kids being born early. I have this anxiety around statistics now, and it's not because I don't enjoy statistics or I'm not good at it, but my child would literally turn blue in the NICU every time I tried to leave to go to class. And so until I finished my PhD, any statistics class I took, I would have this like, okay, I got to center myself and take a deep breath and move through it in order to get there. That happened to me as a student. Trauma also impacts brain development and executive functioning. Remember, most of our students are still in that period where their brain is still developing, right? Late 20s, early 30s for our neurodivergent students. Even if their brain is fully developed, can have a bad day where it impacts your ability to do things and function. Trauma can also cause disabilities, anxiety, depression, dissociative identity disorder. I have a lot of students with all 3 of those who have self-disclosed. Individuals with disabilities develop trauma in educational settings. And many of the symptoms of trauma overlap with disabilities that impact an individual's ability to learn. And the thing we don't want to do, re-traumatization can occur when systems, policies, and practices recreate the stress response in the nervous system. So making sure that we're not causing problems for our students and we're not causing trauma or adding to it.
And I want to add something real quick. Krista just touched on like a re-traumatization component, right? The nervous system does not differentiate. The nervous system stores information the way the nervous system stores information, and it is going to respond to what it knows. And so when Krista said, every time I tried to go to my statistics course, my child turned blue, that's what her nervous system learned, right? And so when that gets triggered, if I can use that word later, the nervous system goes, oh no, I'm in the same place. Like the nervous system, it's fight or flight, it's freeze, it's fawn, it's like the amygdala just goes, ah, right? Like just like that. And it doesn't differentiate. So it knows what it knows until it learns something different.
Yeah. Okay, so some of you may be thinking, oh, but I only have a couple students in my class who are probably impacted by this. So I'm just going to kind of glide on by this and just keep doing how I. The important part here to know is that the rising tide lifts all boats, that all of the students in your class are going to be impacted if you make changes in your class to make it more accessible and trauma friendly. A well-designed course that is accessible and inclusive, taught by an instructor that is welcoming, will benefit all students. The closed captioning that you add to your videos is going to help that single parent that is laying next to their child who's trying to fall asleep while they're sick be able to get through their lesson that day, as well as your student who is deaf or hard of hearing. It helps everyone.
And your students with neurocognitive disabilities.
That too. My son is also neurodivergent and does audio and closed captions to process things when he watches videos. So he's got all three senses taking stuff in right at the same time. So I encourage you to talk. Something is up with my mic. I'm wondering if I'm holding it wrong. Let me see. To change your mindset, presume competency, but also that every student in your classroom has something to add value-wise. The value part is super important. Just allowing them to be in the classroom and be present is not enough. You need to acknowledge their value as well. Okay, we will take questions after the second item. So hopefully they will post their question in the Q&A. Thank you. So again, relating this back to the ASU charter, that we are measured not by whom we exclude, but whom we include and how they succeed. And that is every single one of our students. So creating connections with students. Here we go. There are lots of ways to do this. I'm going to share with you the way that I do this, and there's research on this as well. But infuse yourself into the course, kind of how London did today, how she shared her ducks. If there's something that you have a special interest in and you add that to your courses, students will appreciate it. They'll get to know you a little bit better. I feel like I should also note really quick for later reference, if you go back to that slide where London mentioned the 6 practices, we've put the icons on the slides where they relate. So you can go back and find those later. I also have a colleague who has a cat that makes their presence known in all of their lectures, and it just becomes a thing, right? It's one of those ways that they create connection to their students. I also do a getting to know Dr. Puruhito video at the beginning of my classes. So I teach entirely online. My classes are like 300-person classes, really hard to foster connection in those large classes, right? So I share things about me that just random facts, but students reach out and be like, oh, I did that too, or I also have that interest. And it creates that connection. It allows them to feel like they are something about them is valued, and they feel more likely that they're comfortable sharing in the class about themselves.
And I want to add, so I taught a lot of people may not know this. I taught for 18 years at the community college level. Little things make a huge difference, right? So part of you protecting your safety is knowing what to share and when, right? So things, but even just, so I taught composition and rhetoric, right? It was a gen ed course. It still is. Students hate it, right? And I would tell them on the very first day, my name is London Skiles. I'm your instructor. I got a C in Freshman Comp 101. They need to hear that. Individuals with difficulties related to disabilities and trauma in educational settings need to know that they can get past what is seemingly a failure, right? And then I go on to tell them, you know, I have 2 master's degrees. I have an undergraduate degree. I do all these things, and it kind of blows their mind sometimes, because sometimes that's the first time they've heard that.
Right. And so very well leads into my next thing, is to share interest in life events throughout the course. These are opportunities to connect with students. When it's really hot outside in the summer, you know, hey, I go paddleboarding with my kids. What are you doing? It gives them a chance to chime in. As I mentioned before, 2 of my kids were born extremely prematurely. that impacted my ability to show up into the classroom. I wasn't going to hide that. There was no way possible for me to hide that from my students. Even though I was online, I was late responding to emails. It just impacted how I showed up. And I shared that with them, both modeling that them I'm working through life experiences, but also it allowed them to be a little bit more compassionate in their responses to me, which I think is also an important experience for them, because sometimes they look at us as like robots, right? We're not people. And so giving them that opportunity to humanize me also helped. Okay, so we did talk a little bit about unmasking, being vulnerable, demonstrating compassion and empathy, and the providing students with a model of success. Like I again, like London, I was a parent and having kids, finishing my PhD, and I was teaching. And so just telling them, we're all on our own journey, you'll get there. Some students think that if they have this life event and they take time to pause and process their life, whether that's a leave of absence or a medical withdrawal, that means that they're not going to ever finish college. And that's not the case.
Do I have time to add something?
Yep,
I
go
want to
ahead.
be mindful of our time, but since I am also a huge proponent of modeling what we're talking about, I often share with students, or would, I'm not currently not teaching, eventually hope to get back into it, but the amount of time it took me to get my undergraduate degree was pretty obscene. I was on like the 6-year plan. My first graduate degree, I had a neurocognitive, what I'll call a neurocognitive incident for you, and completely forgot my thesis. And I was supposed to graduate. I took an extra year and I relearned everything. And that's when we say like provide a model, like students need to hear those things. They see instructors as these infallible, well, I don't want to go so far as to say they think we're brilliant, but like they think like we haven't experienced some of these things. And so that disclosure can be really powerful.
And so when we ask our students to share, I encourage you to do so with discretion. Again, I teach large online classes. And so how I do this is I have a Google form linked in my orientation module, and I ask them to share about themselves. This link is in the slides if you want to see the questions I ask, but I do ask their pronouns. I ask them if there's anything that they want to share, open-ended question. And then I also ask them if there are any barriers that they anticipate to their success in the class. And those 3 questions usually allow students to share a fair amount of information if they wish. They don't have to. This is not a graded thing. However, more than 80% of my students do usually fill it out at the beginning of each session. Because a lot of the information they share is the same, I do have some amount of pre-written text that I am able to send them for resources, i.e. I'm pregnant and I'm going to have a baby this session. Please go register for sales accommodations, right? They're in the military, other wide variety of things that allows me to quickly provide support in a somewhat individualized fashion, but it also allows me to prevent issues that would have happened. So I'm able to be proactive in supporting the students and providing them resources, but also just connecting with them. So I can congratulate them on the positive stuff that they shared, as well as troubleshooting in advance so that I don't cause re-traumatization or difficulties for them during the class. And I believe, London, you have one as well.
I did. I added there's a pre-course
survey.
That is a model of one that I have used. I add a question, especially in terms of identity, when I'm connecting with students, where I say, where would you like me to validate and affirm your identity? Because again, safety, right? I'm at the age where I don't care. Like, now I'm at the point where I'm like, if it's not safe, like I'm not gonna like shrink myself, right? But that takes time. to get there. And so students may not have safety in all places. And so I add that question in there as a way to model for them, like, I am creating a space for you to show up, and so that I can affirm you in whatever way will best support you.
All right, so we're going to move really quick to questions. Karen, do you have some online? Okay, I'm going to give you the.
Okay, a question from online is, how do your students react if you put out their disabilities? Doesn't it affect the educational process?
So for me, I actually don't publicly out anyone or discuss their disabilities. If I do discuss it with a student, it's either in a Zoom meeting, again, I teach online, or asynchronously via email. I'm never, ever sharing a student's information. That's actually would be against FERPA. So I wouldn't do that. Was that the only question from online? Okay.
I have two questions. My first is, how can we avoid oversharing? I am an oversharer, which I will try not to do right now. And having that sharing or oversharing some of your own personal experiences then cause like maybe a discomfort, or I don't want to say trigger, but like trigger a response in a student because now I've shared something and now, you know what I mean? Hopefully that makes sense.
Mind if I take this one? So one is, I always think about what's going to best help my students. It's never about me sharing from a place of like, here's all my stuff, right? Oh, sorry, that was unapologetically London right there. That was not in the notes. So I always think about what's going to help my students, right? I was not going to share today about my gender identity, but I felt like it was important to do so today. So that got added in late. When we think about your second question, right? Which I just forgot. So could you please remind me?
Oh, yeah. So the first, well,
Oh,
I
how
haven't
do we
actually-
not re-traumatize?
Yeah. How do we share without either A, oversharing, and B, re-traumatizing people
Yep.
through our sharing?
Excellent question. I often, so I do this in my content. When I was teaching, I would provide content mornings. Notice that I didn't tell you what my adverse childhood experiences were. I just said I had them, right? And so there's like 10 that, you know, so I can say that I have those without oversharing and potentially saying something that's going to hit one of my students, you know, that has a similar ACE, if you will, adverse childhood experience, has a similar ACE, right? Does that help?
It does, yes. Sorry, my other second question was, how do you deal with the subset of students who, when you do share, have an adverse reaction, not in like a re-traumatization type reaction, but a like, ugh, oh my gosh, it's one of those classes. Because I've had students drop classes who are like, oh, we're going to be inclusive and talk about things that are different from me. And how do you keep those students in while still being included? Does that make, sorry, I'm like, does that make sense?
This is my own personal point. I don't try to keep them in. That's part of me giving them autonomy, right? And that is part of me doing inclusive instruction. They have the autonomy to show up or not show up, right? And I will let students know always we're going to talk about things that are going to be difficult, that may bounce up against your values, because that's really another thing that we're thinking about, right? But we're gonna have those conversations, and then students get to do. I don't ever fight to keep a student in that way.
I'm going to borrow your microphone also to share my experience with this. I teach diversity courses, so they're literally there to learn more about others. I heard this beautiful analogy the other day that was used for children, but I really love it. It's talking about pictures and windows, or mirrors and windows, sorry. Some content is going to be a mirror for us and it's going to reflect our lived experiences, and some are going to be windows where we can look into other people's experiences to learn more about the world. And I really try to remind people that their experiences are valid, and if they don't see that in mine, that's unfortunate, but I hope that they are able to continue learning the content to expand their understanding of other people's lived experiences. So I don't invalidate them, which sometimes is hard because they're invalidating your experiences in the moment, right? But I try to just support them in continuing, because I use reflections in my class, so I'm always asking them to apply what they've learned. And at the beginning, they're going to tell me it sucks and there's nothing that they can learn from this course. And usually by the end, 98% of the students tell me, wow, I learned so much, I didn't even know what I was going to learn. And so they're able to continue learning. It's just sometimes hard to continue through that. So, and then Amalia.
Yes. So y'all have talked, and this is a segue to that. So y'all have talked about how you interact with the class. But, usually oftentimes instructors have some community norms for how students interact with each other. But looking at the re-traumatization angle, are there some community norms that you incorporate for everyone to be aware when they speak, how they speak, and how they can be sensitive to others?
Yes, I certainly do. And before this, there's one more question from online, and then we're going to keep going because we are short on time. I apologize. I do definitely have community norms. My first norm for my entire class is to be kind. Show up, be open to other people's experiences, and be kind. And if you don't have something nice to say or write, you don't do it. The students that do those things, the TAs and I quickly remove their posts and have separate conversations with them, because it is about applying the content and sharing your experiences, not about criticizing and judging others. That's not what we're there for. So I do handle those quite quickly. Very rarely do I actually have issues with people doing those things. I would say less than once a semester. They learn quickly, and I think that modeling about the way that I talk to and about things is helpful for them to know what the expectations are.
And I'll just quickly add that, like, I taught rhetoric, right? So there was a lot of conflict. I didn't teach diversity classes. So my students were coming from not all of them were open. And so our community standards in our course were very similar. But I had a practice where, at least when I was I know we're speaking about online environments, right? It does require a lot of engagement and a lot of quick, like if I were in person, right? If I were teaching in person, I had like a phrase that I would use that was like a signal, like we're off our community standards, right? And whatever that phrase was, and students knew. And so that was the cue. There's ways to do that, like Krista was saying, like our TAs, and things like that. Understanding that's about communicating clear and consistent expectations, if I can go back to our standards, right? Or our principles to students, and then intervening quickly when needing. So yes, I don't know if that fully answers your question, but hopefully it at least touches on it. I feel like I could write a whole dissertation on that. So.
Okay, the last online question is, how do you adapt your program according to the results of the pre-course survey?
So I have, this relates back to the end of what we're going to talk about. I have taught long enough to where 98% of the stuff my students share is things other students have already experienced. So my courses are designed to accommodate for that. Everything is closed captioned. Everything has transcripts. My PDFs are accessible. Everything in the next section that we're going to go through is literally all of the things that I do to accommodate that. So I'm actually just going to go on to the slides to show you what I do, if that's okay, London.
while you do that, I'll say content warnings and alternative assessments, alternative practices can help with that as well.
What did I do here? Communicate with students, changing your mindset. So a lot of students that, again, I'll give you an example, students that are anxious, that show up in class, they need consistency and they need kindness, but everyone benefits from that. I try to pick a day of the week where I check in with my students and I ask them how they're doing, whether this is on Slack or in Yellow Dig, whatever it is that you use, block out time to respond. I also try to use things from the Mindfulness Center to help people kind of, if they want or need that opportunity to take a deep breath and center themselves, that they have that. A lot of times they don't know that it's available, or they're like, oh, it's a little hokey. And I'm like, come on, do it with me. Tell me how it made you feel. And then they will. And then also just being empathetic with them and asking them, and then asking them how you can help them. Those emails that come in when they've missed an assignment and I ask them, hey, I noticed you missed this assignment. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help you? I'm not like, hey, it's late. Where are you? Right? How I write that message makes a difference. A lot of times they'll respond and tell me what's going on in their life and how I can support them. Be available and accessible. Encourage them to check in with you and respond when they ask for a meeting. This is so hard when you teach on those large classes, right? But there tends to be only a few students that actually need that from you. And check in on the students who are struggling. I know that we have our grade checks that we submit, but actually sending them a quick note to ask them how they're doing and if there's anything you can do to help really helps. And then London had a point here about an anonymous feedback survey.
Yeah, and this is going to touch on the question about like community standards as well, because in large classes and online classes. So this is a completely anonymous survey that stays open in my courses. And it gives students an opportunity to say, I could not engage with this. This was not accessible. This PDF was scanned. It was an image, so I couldn't read it. Right? Something like that. In what ways were you affirmed or not affirmed? Did you feel safe this week? Right? Like, and it's anonymous. I don't, because I don't need to know. I just need to know that I don't need to know who. I need to know what. Right? And then that helps me address situations throughout the course.
Yeah, and then this leads into troubleshooting with students. The university is big. I have been here since I was an undergraduate. I've worked as a staff member, graduate, TA, RA, you name it, and I've probably done it. One of the my biggest pet peeve as a student and a staff member was when we would just pass the buck and say, oh, I don't have the answer to that, and shut the person down and let them to go traipse around campus trying to figure out how to problem solve themselves. They were open and honest and vulnerable with you and expressed a need. Figure out how to help them find the solution to that problem. They're not always aware of the resources. Just finding something. I mean, again, there's stuff on campus I'm not aware of, but be encouraging. If they need to enroll for supports, sales is hard to. There's a process, right? They can be entirely through an A session before they're even able to meet with a coordinator. If they tell you that they're trying, be lenient with them, like give them the accommodations they need. Yes, it's inconvenient to have to go in and adjust times on a quiz, but maybe you just remove the time from the quiz for everybody if that's easier. But encourage them also to connect with students through other student groups. And remember that students may lack the cultural or social capital to navigate college successfully. I was a first-generation college student myself. There were things that I didn't know. I totally flubbed my graduate school applications because I didn't know about the time and the process and needing the letters and all of the things. And so just keep that in mind that your expectations of students may be from your own lenses and experiences, and they may not have the same knowledge you do.
And I'll say I was undiagnosed in my undergraduate degree and even one of my graduates. And so I didn't even know I needed support. I just thought everybody thought the world was really hard. And I couldn't understand the people that it wasn't hard for. Right? And so that's another barrier we have to think about. And I would say use radical flexibility. And I know we're short on time, so.
Radical flexibility is also our Life Happens pass. I allow all students the opportunity to make up work because life happens. Again, large classes, how do you manage this? I have a Google form, they fill it out. The TAs and I can grade the work. It allows them to, I have a question on there, like how can you better prevent this from happening again next time? That's for my students that struggle with time management. Their answer is usually, I'm working on blocking out time on my calendar, because they know, because I've shared that with them. But London had another example of a faculty member who does radical.
The radical flexibility.
Is that on the next slide?
Yeah, so I actually told this person that I was going to steal it and share it. So if you're watching. So they have the accessibility, the ASU accommodations, but then they also have a personal accommodation statement that I share with students. Like, I want you to succeed. And so even if you do not have outlined ADA accommodations, if you need something to be successful in this course, please let me know.
Okay, I'm going to try to go a little bit faster so we can get through everything. Again, trying to make things easier for both yourself and students. For large online classes, embed a tips and resources module into your course so that all students have access to it. If you find yourself giving the same information repeatedly, share it with everyone. Consider including things that are social capital, like how to prepare for grad school. I have all of those resources in my class. It gets reshared in every single one of them. I have students that reach out later to me and ask for letters, and they're like, thank you for sharing that. I would not have figured that out. And then again, for this is for self-help, but also for helping other students being able to respond. Create email templates for common responses. That may be something everybody already does. It took me a few years to figure that out. When I was just overwhelmed with answering emails all of the time. It really does help. But again, that responding to students is super important. All right, this is the executive functioning part. That's kind of my favorite because I'm not gonna lie, yesterday was a struggle for me for lots of reasons. And I found myself forgetting things and getting tasks done. And so these are things that often prevent students from being successful in a class, right? It's not that they don't have the ability to learn, but memory, task initiation, time management, organization, planning, metacognition, those are all things that are required for learning. And when they are struggling, it makes it harder for them to learn and do those things.
I'll say something really quick. I also hear this a lot. Well, students should know how to do this. Sure. So what? If they don't, right? Let's provide a support. And what we have to understand, the executive functioning is a very neurotypical thing, right? If you have a neurocognitive or a neurodevelopmental disability or trauma, even if you don't have the other two, executive functioning, just the brain pathway changes. It changes the brain. And so what we could do, we may not be able to do. And so, yeah, should students be able to do these things? Yes, but not all students can. And so how can we provide supports?
Yeah, and I would argue that it's not actually something that they should know how to do. It's a lot of it's implied in curriculum in K-12. My child that's neurodivergent, when I met with his IEP team and I said, hey, I want to talk about executive functioning skills. I feel like this is the underlying issue for a lot of issues with him. They looked at me with a blank stare and was like, what are you talking about? What is executive functioning? Once you break it down and I share these things, they're like, oh yeah, I could see how that would cause behavioral problems or learning problems, right, in the classroom. So I use a really cool tool called Scribe How to show students how to connect the course calendar to their, from the LMS to their digital calendar so that all of the deadlines show up. There's never an excuse for, oh, I didn't know that was due. And that Scribe How is linked there, and I walk them through the whole process. And I'll be darned, after I did that, so many, like my number of students who are like, I didn't know about that deadline, it decreased. So I know it made a difference, and I can also see how many people view it each time. The part that they have to do on their own is go in and block out time to actually do the studying. It does remind them that there's a due date, though. Also use the requirements in your learning management system to create a checklist for students to follow. This can be done on, if you click on that link, it shows you how to do that. If you select the option for just to complete one item, it still allows them to create a checklist, but it doesn't require them to finish everything to access the next module in in the curriculum. Super helpful for students to be able to stay on task. And then to-do list.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize that you can make a page, a Canvas page, a to-do. It's a little checkbox. And if you check it, you can set a date and it'll actually add it to the student's calendar as a due date. So you can even help them by saying like, oh, I have this reading. Like, because right, if we have a learning materials page, that may not have a date and that could go missed. If we check it and we mark it as a to-do, it gets added to their calendar.
So this is helpful if you have like a link on a page to tell them it's time to read a chapter and you're suggesting a pace at which they complete that work instead of waiting until the end of the week. It helps them get things done on time a little bit more quickly. Okay, these are a little bit out of order here, sorry. So show students how to adjust their notifications so that they don't get notification fatigue, but still see the important stuff. Students don't always know that they can adjust these. I find that everyone gets either everything or nothing. There's the second page. So showing them, and then I have a video. I say, this is what I expect at a minimum for you to get for the class. They can shut it all off. I don't know. But I'm like, this is the important stuff, right? I don't post a lot of announcements in the class as busy work, but I want you to know about things and it's important that you know about them when I post. And then this is back to kind of the other part about using the task items in Canvas. I think it's super important for students also, if you're using videos or content, to include a time on them. This is their to-do list, but when you're including a time on it, then they know how long that task is going to take. Also, make sure you're only putting one thing on each page. I don't want to think I only have a list of 4 things to do and then open up one of them and figure out it's actually 10 things I need to do and it's going to take me 3 hours, right? I just ruined that student's chance of success because they thought, oh, I've only got 4 things to do. This is something that I have found to be preferred and preferable. It may vary from what I think instructional designers have varying recommendations, but neurodivergent friendly. The downside to this is that I have heard students go, I get overwhelmed just seeing that there's so many tasks. So I don't know how to balance that. London's
Cue the instructional designer. So in the same way that you add times on your learning materials, you can say 3 readings, 4 videos. And now they know on that page that it's not just one thing, right?
So there you go. To encourage metacognition, instead of just trying to memorize stuff, I ask students all of the time to apply what they learn. So these are examples of prompts for yellow dig assignments. I ask them to, this actually is the reflection. This is the initial reflection that I asked them to start at the beginning of the semester. So I asked them, what do you know? Why is it important to learn this content? Tell me about barriers, and then review the rubric. This is super important. Students just don't pay attention. Oh, wait, I need to go back and check I met the requirements. I don't actually grade this section, but I tell them I do. And then they write. They look at it and they write. And they're like, yeah, I was short. You're going to dock me 5 points because I missed this question. Or they go back and fix it. Then they come back and they talk to me. And these are all assignments that only I and the TA view. This particular one is not public, so. All right, okay, quick, you know what? I'm gonna not pause for questions here because we've got like 8 minutes left. So I apologize for that, but we will catch them at the end. This one should be fairly quickly. We're gonna talk quickly about a continuum of supports. So for those of you who are not familiar with SAILS, I hope that you take time to become familiar with SAILS. Look at the general accommodations that they provide and see how you can infuse all of them into your classes. I am at now the point in my teaching where there is literally no accommodation that they ask me to provide that's already not available to all of my students. So that's some base of universal design for learning where I make all of those accommodations for my students. That way students don't have to wait for me to do something to be able to access the course and be successful in the content. And then when we talk about the different levels of support and IDEA, there are varying levels, but again, when we can provide as much as we can to everybody, then that rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, and since we're talking about sales, I'm going to share something with you that a colleague of ours, Darrow Allison, often says and shares. A student doesn't need an accommodation through sales for you to accommodate them. Okay? Yes, they need an accommodation, okay, at times, but students, there's barriers there. We won't go into those. That's another dissertation I could write. But like if a student comes to you and says they're struggling, part of that radical flexibility is like, oh, how can I help this student? Right? So a student may not be able to get that legal accommodation, but they don't need it for us to be able to support them.
Yeah, and I would also argue that that's built on the social construction of disability, right? It's because we create barriers that we then have to make accommodations for. Again, that's a whole different session. I am going to go quickly through these slides because we are at time right now. But I would like to encourage you all to learn more about universal design for learning, how it impacts the brain and students' ability to learn. We have sessions in the conference today on UDL. If you cannot attend them, watch them asynchronously online later. It'll take us a week or two to get these sessions all up and closed captioned, but they will be available on the website later. Here's some more UDL resources that are helpful for post-secondary education, and then also some trauma-informed pedagogy and UDL resources if you care to dig that deep. London was a little afraid to put them on there, but I encourage them to do so because I feel like there are at least a few people who would want to do that. And then additional supports for students at ASU. Sales GATE is a program that is currently offered for campus-based Tempe students that are neurodivergent, extra classes, mentoring, coaching. We are hoping that it will be available online next year. Still working on the mentoring and coaching part of that, but there are a lot of students who can benefit from that. Pitchfork Scholars is now called Maroon and Gold Success Program. It's a program for students with intellectual disabilities. It's a non-degree seeking certificate program we are working on developing, again, hoping that ABOR approves that in February. Student clubs, community engagement at ASU, and we have 3 minutes for questions. And you have 3 online. I'm going to hand you the microphone.
Anyone in the room have a question before I read the online questions? No. Okay. First question. How does one show support, kindness, etc. to a student without either of us becoming too personally involved? Should I communicate boundaries early on? I want to maintain a professional relationship with my students while showing empathy.
So I will self-disclose here. During COVID, that was something that I struggled with because there was a lot happening all at once. George Floyd was murdered. There was a lot of civil unrest. I had to take a step back because my stress levels were not conducive to my mental health. So that's actually one of the reasons why I created that Life Happens Pass form. So it allowed students to share. They would sometimes include very graphic pictures if you've gotten those in emails before. I no longer had to look at them. I just assumed that the student had provided what they felt was necessary or wanted to share, and I would approve their late work. That aside, if they email me directly and tell me something's happening, I validate their feelings. I don't, I'm sorry that you're going through that. That must be hard. How can I help you? You don't always have to share. When someone shares trauma, you don't have to trauma share back. So that's my short answer.
And I will say something that for me is very important. And somebody needs to hear this. Boundaries are kindness. Setting your own boundaries is kindness.
Okay, and it's 10:54. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, thank you so much. Can I contact you regarding the course that has the content about Native American heritage? That was not in this presentation, but look on the schedule. If you're talking about the land acknowledgement,
That's on the ASU website. If you search ASU land acknowledgement, you'll find it. I believe it's on the library's website.
The library has its own land acknowledgement as well. Do we want more or are we done?
Thank you everyone for your time. If you do have a question, you're welcome to come up to us and talk directly. I appreciate everyone coming. If you are headed back out through the doors to the right, there's bathrooms, and then you'll find the Arizona room and the Ventana room there. These are our email addresses. Both Lyndon and I are ASU employees. We're here, happy to help.
So here's the questions that remain. Is Scribe an app? How can we get that?
Okay, so Scribe How is a website. ASU does have some sort of license with them, though I've not been successful in getting an ASU license, but I have one through my personal email address. It's scribehow.com. And then, hi, do we have an estimation for when ABOR may approve the pitchfork? February meeting, Kenna, is when it should go up for approval. And if you click on that link on the page in the slide deck, you can add your name to the interest form, and then you will get emails when we have additional information. Okay, thank you.